They didn't know where they were born, but they knew exactly where they were raised, between dusty bookshelves, under a leaking skylight, in a library that never asked for a name, only offered warmth. Most people remember childhoods marked by bedrooms, kitchens, and backyards. But for Noah and Nathaniel Brooks, their first memory wasn't of a home. It was of a hallway lined with stories, maps, and silence. The night their mother vanished without a word, leaving behind two 5-year-old boys in a cardboard box by the side of Interstate 84. The world forgot them, but a kind-hearted librarian named Mrs. Helen Parker didn't. It was Helen who found them curled up in the snow outside her library's rear door at 5:13 a.m. on a January morning. She should have called social services, but instead, she boiled water for oatmeal, wrapped them in the lost and found's old scarves, and whispered, "You boys are safe now. You can stay until we figure things out." Noah remembers how the radiator hissed in the corner, like a breathing dragon. Nathaniel remembers how Helen's fingers smelled like peppermint and paper, and neither of them would ever forget that she left the back door unlocked every night after that, just in case they came back. They always did. While other kids grew up with fairy tales, the twins grew up reading footnotes, biographies, poetry, and the backs of borrowed encyclopedias. They weren't enrolled in school. They weren't even listed in the system. But by age 10, they could quote Langston Hughes, explain the stock market crash of 1929, and recite the Dewey Decimal System from memory. Their world wasn't safe, but it was rich, and it all lived inside that one-room town library that smelled of coffee, cedar shelves, and second chances. No one ever asked them why they slept on the beanbags in the children's corner. Maybe people knew. Maybe they chose not to. But in a forgotten town with a population of 200, two quiet boys with unmatched minds and tattered shoes became invisible and invincible. They called that library home for nearly a decade. And when they left, they made a vow. "One day," Nathaniel had whispered, "we'll build one of these for every child who's ever felt unwanted." Noah nodded. "One in every state for the forgotten, like us." They were 14 then, homeless, parentless, nameless in the eyes of the state, but beneath their silence lived a fire no system could extinguish. And 25 years later, the world would know their names, not because they were found, but because they built something no one else thought to build. Mrs. Helen Parker had only one rule in her library. It wasn't about late fees or silence. It wasn't even about not eating around the book, which she violated regularly with cinnamon buns and lukewarm coffee. Her rule was simple, unshakable, and often whispered to the boys in the quiet hour before closing. Whatever life gives you, you return it better, even if it's broken. Noah didn't understand it the first time. He was 8, trying to tape the spine of a worn-out copy of The Wind in the Willows. "But this book's falling apart. Miss Helen," she'd smiled gently and handed him a glue stick. "That's exactly why we fix it." Nathaniel had taken to her lessons faster. He wasn't just fixing books. He was categorizing them, reorganizing the shelves when no one was watching, and creating index cards for the ones too old to be in the system. Helen noticed. She never praised him aloud, but she started calling him my little librarian in training. And Noah? He wasn't the organized one. He was the one who read aloud to kids who came in with bruises and downcast eyes, the one who stayed late to help the janitor sweep, who memorized the stories of every regular visitor. When the Vietnam vet with the trembling hands forgot his name, it was Noah who reminded him, quietly, kindly, as if he'd never forgotten at all. Helen raised them with books instead of lectures. Her rules weren't posted on a wall. They were sewn into gestures, a blanket folded over a sleeping shoulder, a thermos of soup waiting near the radiator, a post-it note that said, "Try page 137," stuck in the middle of a philosophy book. But the truth was, Helen wasn't young, and she wasn't well. By the time the boys were 13, she had started keeping a cane behind the desk. Her fingers, once so quick at flipping pages, shook when she tried to shelve books above her shoulder. Some nights, She fell asleep before locking the front door, and the boys began locking it for her, one cold November evening. After closing, she called them to the back office, the only space in the library with a door. She handed them 2 envelopes. "I want you to have these," she said. Inside was a library card for each of them. Their first, with names handwritten in calligraphy. Noah Brooks, Nathaniel Brooks. "You named us," Noah whispered. Helen's smile was tired. "No, you named yourselves. I just wrote it down." Then she added, "One day, you'll outgrow this place. You'll leave. And when you do, remember my rule?" Nathaniel asked. "Return what we borrowed?" She nodded. "This place sheltered you. Dignity. Purpose. One day, someone else will need those things. Return them better." The next morning, Helen didn't open the library. An ambulance came quietly. No sirens, no drama, just stillness. She had passed in her sleep, seated in her usual spot, an open book in her lap, her glasses slipping off the edge of her nose. The heater was still humming. A pot of tea is still warm. They held her funeral in the reading corner. Noah and Nathaniel were allowed to speak. No legal guardians, no family. But the townspeople understood. These boys were hers. Noah stood up, voice shaking. "She never asked us where we came from, only where we were going," Nathaniel added. "And now, we know." This town closed the library the next month. Budget cuts, no replacement. The boys stayed behind as long as they could, sleeping in the darkened building even as the power was shut off. But on the last night, just before the sheriff came with an eviction notice, they lit candles and made a pact. "We'll come back," Noah whispered. Nathaniel nodded. "And we'll return what we borrowed." Archidors. The night they left the library for good, the sky refused to rain, almost as if it knew the boys couldn't carry both grief and wet clothes on the same shoulders. They walked out with nothing but their library cards. 2 backpacks filled with secondhand paperbacks, and Helen's final words echoing in their minds like a sacred verse. Noah was 14, Nathaniel, 2, but they were older in the ways that counted, old in the eyes, quiet in the soul. The world outside that library did not know what to do with boys who quoted Plato and folded laundry with military precision. They were too old for foster care, too young to rent a room, and too proud to beg. For a while, they survived by fixing things: bicycles, torn clothes, broken heaters, anything people couldn't afford to replace. Nathaniel did the hands-on work. Noah talked to people, listened to their stories, and bartered services for food. But people didn't remember names. Not really. They remembered looks, voices, mistakes. And so, for years, the twins moved from town to town, always together, always learning. In Idaho, they lived in a tool shed behind a church and spent their days at the local library, sneaking into community college lectures. In New Mexico, they worked on a pecan farm and read engineering textbooks by flashlight. In Ohio, they took shelter in an abandoned school gymnasium and learned to code on public computers at the city library. They were not registered for school, yet they mastered quantum mechanics before they could legally drive, not because they wanted success, but because they remembered what Helen said: "Return what you borrowed, better." By the time they were 18, they had taken the SATs under temporary identities, scored in the top 1%. Still, no scholarship wanted unverifiable minors. No government agency could process 2 boys with no birth certificates, no next of kin, and no past until a man named Dr. Elias Jordan found them. Dr. Jordan was a visiting professor, lecturing at a city library in Chicago. He noticed 2 young men sitting in the back row, correcting his formulas in the margins of donated notebooks. After his talk, they approached him, not to flatter him, but to offer a better proof for one of his unsolved equations. "You boys in college?" he'd asked. Stunned, "We're not enrolled anywhere," Nathaniel replied, "but we live nearby." "Where, exactly?" Noah smiled softly. The boiler room in the basement, next to the archives. Dr. Jordan didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "Pack your things. I'll figure out the paperwork." He did more than that. He found a way to get them audited into university courses. He vouched for their genius. And when they were finally allowed to take placement tests, they scored higher than most of the graduate students. But they never took a full scholarship, never accepted a dorm. They preferred to live modestly, splitting one studio apartment, walking miles instead of riding buses, saving every penny, because in their minds, they weren't climbing out of poverty. They were collecting seeds for something bigger, for Helen, for that broken library in that forgotten town, and for every child who ever searched for warmth between pages. The world often celebrates loud success, men in suits ringing bells on Wall Street, billionaires announcing ventures from glass towers. But Noah and Nathaniel Brooks built their empire in silence. No headlines, no press, just code, grit, and the memory of a library with no lock. It began in a corner of their studio apartment in Detroit, 2 borrowed laptops, 2 folding chairs, one idea. What if knowledge didn't hide behind paywalls? Nathaniel wrote code like he was transcribing music. Fluent, elegant, fast. Noah mapped content networks, contacted open source authors, and built partnerships with online educators. They launched Openverse, a digital platform that offered free courses for underserved communities. Subjects ranged from basic literacy to astrophysics. In the first month, they had 112 users. In the second, they had 8. By the end of the year, over 2 million people in 17 countries had accessed their platform. Not just kids, but single mothers, refugees, and retired veterans. Anyone who needed to learn quietly, affordably, and with dignity. Then came the buyout offers. Tech giants called, investment funds circled. One company offered $20 million to acquire the platform. Nathaniel looked at the number. Noah looked at the sender. They said no, because they didn't build it to sell. They built it to return what they had borrowed. Instead, they registered a nonprofit, and every dollar they earned from licensing their software to school districts or government agencies was funneled right back into expansion. At 23, they were on Forbes' radar, but refused every interview. They declined the 30 under 30. They never showed their faces publicly. The platform's About Us section simply read, "Created by 2 boys who once lived in a library." When pressed by a journalist at a rare conference, Noah finally said, "We don't need credit. We need classrooms, libraries, safe places to learn. That's our reward." But behind that calm voice was pain they never erased. Because for every child they reached, they remembered the ones no one ever did. At 25, they made their first big move. They returned to the town where it all began. The library was gone, replaced by a parking lot and a discount liquor store. But the foundation stones remained. They walked the perimeter in silence, as if measuring the outline of a ghost. Then Nathaniel knelt and placed a library card in the dirt. Noah whispered, "Time to return it better." That summer, they broke ground and built the first Helen Parker Memorial Library. It wasn't just a building, it was a sanctuary, solar-powered, open 24/7, no locks, no ID required. Inside, there were sleeping pods, laundry machines, counseling rooms, and thousands of books, curated with love, not algorithms. When it opened, they didn't speak at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. They stood in the back row and clapped with everyone else. The mayor asked later, "Why didn't you come forward?" Nathaniel simply said, "Because libraries are for everyone, not just the ones with names on plaques." The second library appeared in a desert town in Arizona, just outside a trailer park where 300 families shared one broken water line and a single school bus. No news crews covered the construction. No social media posts marked the grand opening. But on a quiet Sunday morning, a brown-eyed girl named Lila pushed open the glass doors and found air conditioning, picture books in Spanish, and a woman who said, "Take your time. Sweetie, this place is yours." The woman didn't know who funded it. She only knew she was hired to welcome everyone. Then came the third library in the Mississippi Delta, the fourth in the mountains of Utah, the fifth on tribal land in South Dakota, and by the time they reached the 10th, a quiet rumor began to spread in community forums, librarian circles, and late-night Reddit threads. There's someone out there rebuilding forgotten libraries and not taking credit. People speculated. Was it a secret philanthropist? An anonymous trust fund? A spiritual movement? The truth was simpler. It was two brothers, still bunking in the same modest apartment, still eating peanut butter sandwiches, still coding late into the night, still remembering Helen. They didn't hire PR firms. They hired local contractors. They didn't chase metrics. They chased meaning. For each new location, they asked one question: where are the kids who've been overlooked? Their algorithm wasn't artificial intelligence. It was emotional intelligence. And the memory of how it felt to be invisible. Some towns resisted them. In one Texas county, a councilman scoffed, "You're building a library? That's not what these people need." Nathaniel responded calmly, "That's exactly what we heard when we needed one." 2. They built it anyway. And when a woman who had been homeless for 9 years came in just to sit near a lamp and charge her Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, they gave her a quiet smile and fresh socks from the free pantry. In Minnesota, they built a library with a dedicated wing for recovering veterans. In Vermont, one with a soundproof reading room for autistic children. In Florida, a library stood 2 feet above the flood line, designed by kids from the local high school. By the 25th library, people started mailing them stories. Letters arrived by the dozens, some handwritten in cursive, others typed in block letters. "My son said his first full sentence in your library. I'm 61, and I just learned how to read here. This place saved my marriage." It gave us a reason to hope again. And still, Noah and Nathaniel never signed their names. They simply marked each building the same way. A brass plaque by the entrance, for the child who needed a home between the pages. But something happened at library number 50. A girl named Eden stood up at a town hall meeting in Kentucky. She was 11, wore a t-shirt that said, "Queen of My Story," held a paperback copy of The Giver in her small hands, and she said, "Whoever built this place, I want you to know, you saved my life." A local reporter wrote the story. It went viral. By morning, people were asking, "Who's behind the Helen Parker libraries?" And for the first time, the brothers didn't hide, because now the mission was too big for just the two of them. The auditorium smelled faintly of sawdust and folding chairs. It was the kind of place where middle school recitals were held, not national press conferences. And yet, every seat was filled, not because of a flashy invitation, but because the whispers had grown too loud to ignore. 2 brothers, 50 libraries, 0 publicity. Someone had to explain. When Noah and Nathaniel stepped onto the stage, there was no spotlight, just a soft glow from the overhead fluorescence and the quiet hush of hundreds waiting. Noah wore a simple gray sweater. Nathaniel had his sleeves rolled up. Neither looked like a CEO's. Neither wanted to. They didn't carry notes. They didn't need them. Noah leaned into the mic, his voice steady. "Thank you for being here. We're not used to this." A soft ripple of laughter. "We were raised in a place that didn't ask for headlines. It just gave us warmth. A librarian once told us, 'Return what you borrow.' Better. We never forgot." Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice deeper, quieter. "We don't want statues or awards. We want safe places, quiet ones, for kids who need a moment to breathe, a place to open a book and feel possible." Someone in the audience, an older man with tear-streaked cheeks, stood up and asked, "Why didn't you ever tell the world?" Noah answered without hesitation. "Because the world loves stories with stars. We love stories with roots, silence, heavy, beautiful." Then Eden, the little girl from Kentucky, stood up beside her mother, who held her trembling hand. "You gave me more than a book," she said. "You gave me a place to feel like I wasn't stupid." Noah's throat caught. Nathaniel looked away for a second. The room held its breath. "We built that place," Noah finally said, voice thick, "because we once felt the same." That day, the Brooks twins didn't just reveal their identities. They ignited something. Donations surged, not just money, but stories, offers to volunteer, retired teachers wanting to teach again, architects wanting to design branches in their hometowns. Even a former NFL player pledged to fund 3 libraries in underfunded districts. They never asked for help, but now the help came, not to praise them, but to join them. That night, as they left the auditorium, a young boy with a backpack ran up to them. "Hey," he said, breathless. "Are you the guys who built the place on 17th and Polk?" Nathaniel smiled. "We are," the boy nodded, then pulled something from his coat, a Rolex 12633, fake, missing its crown. "I don't have money, but you can have this. You helped my mom learn English." Noah knelt to the boy's height. "You keep it," he said. "Wear it like it's real, because you are." The boy beamed. Nathaniel whispered, "Helen would have loved him." It took them 15 years. 15 years of traveling back roads and forgotten zip codes, of town hall meetings in broken gymnasiums, of cutting ribbons not with gold-plated scissors, but with the hands of children who didn't know they were holding history. But they did it. 50 libraries, one in every state. Each one is different. Each one is the same. In Alaska, the library was built on stilts, wrapped in glass that reflected the northern lights. With shelves warmed by radiant floor heating, it welcomed children whose boots carried snow in silence, and offered books in Inuit and English. In Georgia, the Helen Parker Memorial stood next to a church, with rocking chairs on the porch and a community kitchen inside. It opened its arms to single mothers, to grandfathers teaching grandsons how to hold a pencil, to children whose only haven was chapter books and crayons. In California, it was solar-powered and built with reclaimed wood. In Nebraska, it shared walls with a grain co-op. In New York, it rose between 2 aging apartment blocks like a lantern in the dark, free Wi-Fi, a 24-hour reading lounge, and a youth poetry room covered in chalkboard walls. They didn't just build structures, they built an inheritance. And at the heart of each one, beneath every beam and brick, was a single promise engraved on a bronze plate at the entrance, for the child who needed a home between the pages. But the final library, the 50th, was different. It was built in Oregon, not far from the woods where Helen had first found them. They purchased the exact parcel of land where the original town library once stood. The liquor store was gone, the parking lot cracked and empty. And there, among wild grass and memory, they laid the first stone with their own hands. They didn't hire a crew for this one. They invited every child who had ever stepped through the doors of the other 49 libraries. Over 1,000 came, now grown, now parents, now teachers, now dreamers, and they built it together. The doors of the 50th library were made of carved oak, with the names of every librarian who had made a child feel seen etched into the grain. Inside, under the central skylight, stood a life-size sculpture, not of Noah, not of Nathaniel, but of Helen, seated in a chair, glasses on the bridge of her nose, holding an open book in her lap, a bronze scarf looped around her shoulders, and on a table beside her, 2 library cards, Noah Brooks, Nathaniel Brooks. It rained the day it opened. Not a storm, just a soft, steady mist. Nathaniel looked up and smiled. She would have said it was good weather for staying in and reading. Noah didn't speak. He was watching a little girl curl up in the beanbag chair beneath the poetry shelf, the same spot where he once slept. Her feet were bare. Her hair was tangled. She didn't look up when he passed by. She didn't need to. She was home. There are some legacies you can't measure in dollars, or charts, or donor walls. You measure them in silence, the kind that lives between the turning of pages, in the eyes of a child mouthing out words for the first time, in the hush that falls over a room, not because someone said quiet, but because something sacred is happening, That's how you measured the legacy of the Brooks twins, not by their net worth, though by now, Openverse had spread to 40 countries and was used by over 80 million people, not by the libraries, though each one stood as a monument to what two invisible boys could become when given a safe place to grow, but by what they unlocked, like the boy in Kansas who used the library printer to apply to college and became the first in his family to graduate, or the retired truck driver in Maine who learned how to write a memoir and gave his grandchildren the gift of his voice, captured in chapters, or the woman in Montana who brought her infant every day and read aloud, even when the baby couldn't speak. "I don't know if he'll remember the books," she once told a staff member, "but I hope he remembers the feeling." And still, the brothers never chased legacy. They kept their same car, a used Mercedes 190 SL gifted by a grateful community college professor. They wore the same sweaters. Nathaniel still preferred his old Kari Tra Smeckerpont for long coding nights. Noah, when asked about his outfit at a speaking event, just smiled and said, "I like my t-shirt that says Queen. Makes me feel like Helen's still teasing me from somewhere." They aged quietly, not with fame, but with purpose. When the National Library Association offered to name an award after them, they declined. "Name it after Helen." They said, "She gave us everything." In their 60s, they began visiting the libraries again, one by one, no fanfare, no announcements, just two older men walking through aisles, gently touching spines of books, smiling at the sound of whispered curiosity. Sometimes, children would approach them unknowingly and ask, "Do you work here?" Nathaniel always answered. In a way, Noah would sit on the floor beside them and read aloud, just as he used to. One evening, in the Oregon library where it had all begun, a teenager asked them a question that stopped time. "How did you know what the world needed?" Noah looked at the boy, and after a long pause, said, "We didn't. We just gave the world what it needed and hoped someone else might need it too." That night, the lights inside the 50th library stayed on until midnight, not because of an event. But no one wanted to leave, and no one was asked to. As they walked out, Nathaniel whispered, "Do you think we returned it?" Noah looked back at the building glowing behind them. "We didn't just return it," he said. "We rewrote it. And maybe that's the lesson the Brooks twins left us, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can build is not a name, not a brand, not even a building, but a place where the forgotten become the remembered, where the small feel tall, where the quiet find voice, and where two boys who once had no home gave millions a reason to believe that knowledge. Kindness and dignity, when shared, become infinite.